Welcome to the Octopod. I'm Kyle Davies, head of the Office of the CTO. Join us as we dive into the latest technologies and trends shaping business. Whether you're a tech enthusiast, a business leader, or just looking to stay ahead in the digital age, this podcast is for you. Let's unlock opportunities with technology together. Let's jump in, everybody, to this second episode of the Octopod podcast. Now, I want to thank everybody for their feedback on the previous episodes that we've been launching over the last few weeks. And the feedback has been really insightful around what you would like to hear and the questions you'd like us to answer and insights that you'd like us to provide. And to give you a bit of insight into that, we're going to actually launch a bonus episode where we answer some of those questions, specifically around the VMware podcast that we did, where people have asked questions around licensing and how do I look to get the most value from my platforms moving forward. So we're going to do that. We're going to launch those, and then you can listen to them to your heart's content. Now, today, I am joined by Tim Russell and Stephen Faulkner from the Office of the CTO, and we're going to be carrying on this hybrid world series by talking about what's happened to the 3-day weekend, right? And what is happening with the hybrid world. Because realistically, things have changed and things are starting to change again, right? As this ever-evolving way of working is taking place. So what we're going to be covering in this episode is the insights into what the analysts and our customers that we talk to and what they're doing. We're going to be sharing with you whether we believe there's going to be a return to office mandate coming, right, which is quite a hot topic at the moment. The pros and cons to hybrid work, how you can deliver a successful hybrid work model that allows you to be agile and flex to a office or remote working scenario. And then we're going to dive into how do you secure your most vulnerable assets, your people, because if they're hybrid, there is potentially more risk. So let's jump in. So Tim, one of the things that I want to kind of touch on today is whether the return to office is presenteeism or a productivity booster, right? And the reason I'm asking this question is we've seen from a global survey by KPMG that 4/5 of bosses expect a return to office 5 days a week within the next 3 years. I'm hearing similar things from some of our customers. And we've seen people like Amazon and various other people come out and say they're going to look to enforce people back into offices because it's damaging their culture as an organization and they want to get people together more. So it'd be good to kind of hear what you're seeing on the street as you're meeting customers and seeing the insight from our partner ecosystem as well. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really interesting statistic, and it does reflect what I'm hearing from customers and what I'm hearing from analysts. The thing is, RTO, or return to office, is this big thing because we had this all at home thing. But during the at home period, so much development, so many things moved forward. We had what were previous contact centers for some large organizations that were primarily based in large 1970s concrete buildings where people would physically have to go and operate. And they've realized that by moving these agents home when they were forced to, they've now actually got an operational efficiency. They've got the ability to operate with these people at home. But similarly, as you rightly say, culture is an issue. Now, I think there is just so many things I could put in this call. We could probably talk for hours, but I'm going to pull out a couple of statistics. There was a UK trial for 61 companies, and they trialed a 4-day work week. And the overarching response was it was a resounding success. Now, I won't go into all the details of what defines a success, but 56 of the 61 businesses decided to continue with the practice. And it wasn't necessarily because they saw a direct result on their bottom line. It was as you hinted at there earlier, Carl, it was the protection of the employees. 39% reduction in stress is quoted, 71% decrease in burnout. Similarly, you've got to protect your people because they're the people who do the business. But they also saw a 57% drop in the number of people leaving during the trial. Now, again, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. But if we look at those, they're fairly compelling for those businesses. But that's just one story. I have to be honest, when I look at businesses that returned to the office, whether it's 3, 4, or 5 days, there isn't a monumental difference between those who've decided that hybrid working is the way forward. And I've worked as a hybrid employee since the early 2000s, where a day at home or a couple of days at home wasn't a problem because it was realized in the sector that I worked in, the sort of work you needed to do was sometimes best in contemplation and silent creation. Now, not every business area is going to be able to support that. So I've got off a little bit of a tangent. But there is a 3-day work week which can be applied to certain business areas, but it is not a one size fits all. There are some areas, some industries where this wouldn't fit, but there are alternatives that allow you to work in just such an efficient way and deliver what is ultimately choice to the employees for those who do want to work the short or the compressed week.
I think from my perspective, and I've still got many years of work left in me, right? Unfortunately, when you look at the paperwork and think, wow, pension's quite a way off for me. But I look at it and I think I am used to and now indoctrinated in working a 5-day week, right? For as much as a 4-day working week or a 3-day weekend would sound fantastic to start with, it wouldn't mean to me personally I would end up not working the 5th day, right? Because I'm so used to doing it and I like to get the amount of work done that I get done. So I think culturally there's an element of businesses looking at, to your point, whether this is going to work in their kind of organizations, but then also it's whether your employees are willing to accept that way of working, because there's another wider aspect to this, because you mentioned the statistics around it decreasing stress and things. But if an organization says you've got to do all of your 5 days worth of work in 4 days, but actually you were doing 6 or 7 days worth of work in 5, you've now got all that work in 4, which actually will increase the stress level, right? So I think, as you said before, statistics are statistics. They can be made to tell a different story depending on which angle you're coming from. But I think the key thing for me here is that we need to, as technologists and as IT departments and in organizations, is look at how do we provide a flexible working model that allows an organization to pivot and react to different ways of working depending on what's happening. So whether that is, I want everyone in an office, whether I want some people in an office, some people working remotely, whether I need everyone remotely because there's another challenge around business continuity requirements, whatever it might be, you have the capability to do that, right? And I think that's the key thing. So, but I think there will be quite a few organizations that do mandate a return to office. Now, there is some other reports that I've been reading from McKinsey's and some investor relations reports for the NASDAQ where they've actually analysed, I think it was the top 60 organisations that are listed, and some of them that are allowing remote work and some that are enforcing office working hasn't made a blind bit of difference to their share price and their results, right? And again, that is only in a snapshot of time, but it may not make a difference to the results, but the results internally around co-worker or people satisfaction and training and development and kind of building that team and family-based mentality within your organization may be more achievable face-to-face than it would be over Teams, right? Or equivalent platforms.
Let me give you a counterpoint on this, and let's go a little bit holistically with this. Now, I do a lot of volunteering work with kids, and quite often it's evenings, weekends, and things like that. And I've got to take the perspectives. Obviously, we work for a technology company. So here's the thing, AI, I'm going to say the word, it's out there. But what if AI gave me back 90 minutes a day, which is realistically possible? It can cut out the noise. And what if I worked a 4-day week, but my 5th day was actually volunteering? If we step back from just the technology, which would enable me to get those extra 90 minutes a day, to be more productive, to actually have more control of my agenda, I might still work 5 days, but that 5th day would be a far more beneficial to the greater good. And I hate that term, but people outside my normal circle. We have the technology, we have the capabilities, the implementation of AI, the implementation of data controls, the implementation of equipment that allows us to work in various places. Means I could volunteer for half a day, but spend half a day wherever I am volunteering, doing my actual workshop. And we start picking up all of these technology capabilities. And I think it balances into two things. The technology, when implemented in the correct way with the right gates in place, will allow us to do what we want. What's going to make this possible, what's going to make this productive, and you hinted at it there, is actually culture. Technology will let you do it when it's implemented in the right way, but it's a culture that has to drive that change if there's a perceivable benefit.
So before we kind of go into some pros and cons, I know Stephen's got something to add to this one. I've got a point to mention on this. We do what we are taught. So you mentioned kids, right, and people in school. How many days do people go to school for when you're a child? 5.
4.5. Yeah.
5 days, right? It's 5 days, not full days, but it's 5 days generally. When you go to college or high school or whatever kind of equivalents you have in your regions, it's 5 days. You go to university, it's generally 5 days, but with bigger gaps for self-study. So when you go into the world of work, what are you used to? 5 days, right? So, and this is the cultural barrier we're going to have to get. It's a massive change in everything we do as a country. If we look at the UK specifically for a second, to drive that behavioural change. And I think, for as much as it sounds fantastic, I think we'll be quite a way off before people start to adopt it in any mass way. Stephen, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think you're right, Kyle. I think it's habitual. So that, the habits that we have are actually ingrained. But actually, if you think about what it does at a human level in terms of maybe if the studies are to be believed, by reducing the stress and that risk and that anxiety and everything, we can actually, and I'm going to put a security connotation on this, but we can maybe even reduce that risk of people clicking on those phishing links and doing those things when they're tired or they're stressed. They do those things that they're just trying to get done. So if you've actually de-stressed the working environment by introducing the 4-day week or the 3-day weekend, then maybe you will reduce that risk. That is a bit hypothetical, but I'm going to use an analogy linking to insurance. So if you think about the way insurance companies calculate risk, the amount of time you spend in your car on the road, if you've got in your insurance tipped 30,000 miles, you're likely to pay more of a premium. If you're on the road in a shorter amount of time, so maybe 5,000 miles, your premium may be less. In other words, you've got less risk of having accidents. Probably the same with being online in the working environment. If you reduce that time online, you're therefore reducing your risk of being attacked by a percentage. I mean, that is a little bit hypothetical, but I wanted to add that just as a bit of a thought to add to the debate.
I think I agree with that sentiment a little bit, right? Now, let me play it back another way, because, I like to think of things slightly different to most people. So, yes, you're on the road for 30,000 miles, and therefore your risk of potentially having or being in an accident is higher. But if you're only driving 5,000 miles a year, the amount of experience you're gaining is much less than a 30,000 mile person. Therefore, you might actually be the one that causes the accident, right? So, and there's those kind of things that come into it, right? And I think this is where experience over time comes in and all that kind of stuff. But as this is all hypothetical, let's move into something that the listeners can take away and action. So if we think about delivering a successful hybrid work approach with technology, right? So Tim, will come to you first. What can organizations do to allow that flexibility and agility? Because I'm going to be honest, just picking on meeting room experiences, it sucks, right? Hybrid meetings suck. Why? Because if you're the only person that joins remote and everyone else is in the room, no matter what you do, you are not the same class citizen as everyone else that's in that room, because you are there at the end of a screen or a microphone or whatever it might be. That's just one example, right? But if you think about holistically across the device estate, the application delivery model, the remote access solutions, how do we secure people, all that kind of stuff, what can organizations do to help deliver a hybrid work successfully, securely, to attract and retain staff?
Yeah, and there's a fair valid point. It's funny you say about a second-class citizen. That hasn't changed since we had star conference phones in the 90s, where 10 people would be in a meeting room and one person would be in their car, and it was one of two roles. A person remote in the car who was dialed into the star phone either took over the whole call because they were louder and the microphone, the speaker was turned up too loud, or they were a silent participant and as you rightly said, a second-class citizen. I think technology is moving forward. If we look at meeting rooms equipment, we look at the inclusivity and equity angle that's coming in, it's changing. But there's a cultural acceptance that's got to be put there as well, that people who are remote are not a lesser citizen. They've got to be presented and given an equal right. Now, technology is moving forward. And we've seen that throughout the last couple of years. Technology creates, frames, and presents people in a way that makes them feel equal to those in the room. Audio-only participants are always going to struggle to a certain degree, but the body language and the physical presence of people is changing. What I think is important to note is it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I recently worked on a hackathon with KPMG, funnily enough, and we spent 2 days in a massive room full of whiteboards. And we built, we put into teams, we built up this rapport with each other because of that physical presence. But what that meant, that our next 3 months worth of meetings, because some of the team were in Switzerland and various other places around Europe, we could meet virtually because we'd built up that social connection, that rapport, and we could keep the connection and the project going over the next couple of months by virtual. But what we realized is every quarter we needed to be face to face. So what it is understanding as a business, if you're going to offer hybrid, make it very clear that there is no replacement of physical face-to-face connectivity and the body language and the rapport that you build up, but understand that a virtual presence can help you maintain once you've created that base level. And technology, as I've already said, has reached that point where our presence is far more inclusive and equitable than it has ever been before. But I also similarly say forcing 100% face-to-face is also maybe not the most productive way of creating these innovative environments.
Yeah, I think we think of the meeting room perspective, that makes sense. And I know that, for example, in our team meetings, we get together on a monthly basis face-to-face, but that's because we live in the UK very close to each other and it's quite easy for us to come together. And then the rest of our meetings are mostly remote, unless we're lucky to all be in the same location at the same time by coincidence. Right? And that's probably because I'm an advocate of getting together and having a bit of social time and being humans with each other rather than just treating people like an avatar on a screen. So if we take it a different way, right? So we talk about meeting rooms and how they need to be hybrid and how do we get that collaboration working. Think about like the other sides of technology of this, right? Which is things like your device, right? The ownership models that are available. So we've got corporate only, business only, corporate only, personally enabled, choose your own device, bring your own device, and all these other 4-letter acronyms you can use. I'm seeing from conversations with C-level that I'm talking to that they are mostly for laptops and PC kind of working, using a corporate only, business only approach with a choose your own device overlay, which means there's a catalog you can choose from as an employee. So it gives you an element of choice and identity to a device, but the organization gets to say you can only use that for business only purposes. So you can't install Doom and play LAN parties and all that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of thing that I'm seeing from a device ownership model. And that also then negates the challenges around tax with bring your own device. It also negates some issues around support models and all that kind of stuff. And it also helps with security, which we'll touch on in a minute with Stephen, around that device now being in full conformity to business standard.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same, but I'm also seeing a less is more kind of thing. So, listeners, how many of you have a business phone and a personal phone? Would you do the same with your laptop? What's acceptable personal use on your device? What does your business see as acceptable personal device? We have, I think, still a legacy of mentality that if I'm in the office, I have maybe 2 breaks and a lunch break a day. And some organizations really police that. And in those moments, you can go and do personal things. Have a phone call, call the insurance company, change your mileage on your car, as Steve was saying that earlier on. By nailing it all down, I think we create some issues, and I think they're not going to be technology issues. It's going to be going into the talent attraction or retention. People don't want to buy their own devices. They do it with mobile phones because we've been doing that for a long time, but we're not about to go out and buy a second laptop to carry around with us unless you're you showed your age there, by the way, Carl said LAN party. I'm sorry, I think those things are very old now, but if you wanted to online game, you can do this on your mobile phone sometimes, but you wouldn't unless you're really hardcore carry a second laptop around you. I think, weirdly enough, and this is a strange thing, we were talking about this before, businesses seem to trust a mobile phone more than they trust a laptop. Now, I use an operating system that allows a split ownership model where half of my mobile phone has a work policy and half of it has a private policy, and near the twain shall meet. But we don't do that with laptops because it's not possible. Businesses need to protect their assets. Businesses need to protect their investments. But one of those most important assets and investments are the people. So corporately owned, business only, yes, it's the most secure way of dealing with your asset from a technical perspective. But is it the most enabling perspective for your people? I think, Steve, maybe you want to touch on that one a little bit, because I think from my perspective, I see the pragmatic is technology will allow us to do this. This technology will enable people. It will give them choice. It will give them, as Kyle said, their brand identity. But ultimately, it's about protecting the business and their investments.
In terms of security, if we think about, we can rewind the clock, right? If we think about everybody coming into a place of work, and what we used to hear from a security perspective is about building walls around that place of work of security defenses, defense in depth, a castle type approach. And everybody within it was secured with their corporate build laptop, and you get the odd occasion where someone would still work remotely and be connected in via VPN, all within that corporate network. Now, though, with the high degree of mobility, and whether we're in work or out of work or traveling or going to different places, we have to think about the way we secure that asset and the way we use that asset. And more particularly, the identity of that user and that person. So really what's happening now is we've seen the identity become the perimeter rather than the perimeter firewalls around the corporate environment. The identity has become that perimeter. And it actually doesn't matter whether you're using a corporate build laptop, a partially enabled laptop, all the variations of bring your own device and not, whether it's your personal device or half and half. We still fundamentally need to focus on the identity of that user and how to protect the organization when those users are accessing corporate information, data, applications and assets. And so I guess we have seen a bit of a technology change in that respect, where we've seen technology companies now enable that type of behavior through things like SASE, architecture, zero trust, the things like that. You'll hear these terminologies coming on. I think in the next sessions we're going to dive deeper into those things and what they fundamentally mean. But if you think of the approach of, say, zero trust, for example, that's a never trust, always verify type of thing. So that means we never inherently trust access to data, network applications, the user. We always verify, and we always use things like multi-factor authentication to really verify that it is that user and that user is allowed to access the resources that they're supposed to. We are seeing, we've seen a lot of change. We've seen a lot of change over the years. Obviously, the thing that forced a lot of business into this new model of hybrid working, whether it comes back or not, was, the pandemic. But that accelerated those models, and using centralized cloud services and SaaS-based applications has also been a factor.
Yeah, I think when we think about this kind of from a business perspective, because we can technically secure most approaches, but if you have personal on Windows-based devices predominantly, right, and Mac-based devices, Apple devices, you will get this kind of potential crossover pollination of data and things that you can't control to a full extent, which is why a lot of organizations and their InfoSec teams do mandate today still a corporate-only, business-only approach, or a bring-your-own-device approach that then has a virtual workspace that you log into, the likes of your Citrixes, your Omnisys, your AVDs, whatever it might be, to get into a secure virtual platform that you can then use, that they have the guardrails around, right? There's still kind of conversations we're seeing, which is crazy to think about, that many years ago was the year of VDI and everything else, and that never came, and we're still waiting for that year, and I've built my career around that kind of stuff, and I'm still waiting for it. But realistically, I think when an organization is looking at doing hybrid work, they need to look at the way they want their organization to function. Ignore all the news, ignore all the statements out there in the press, and not saying ignore the kind of things around employee retention and well-being and things, because they're super important. But as a business, you will have a cultural and a value system that you are trying to get into your workforce and into your kind of services you provide. And if that is what you're going to get behind, then you find the technology to underpin that deliverable. Right? And that's the key thing here, is getting into that weeds of how do you want your people to work. And I think if we think about the hybrid work thing, Tim, this is a fun thing to go into for a second. Digital employee experience has been, I'd say, a hot topic for 24 for me, right? And really getting that visibility, not Big Brother and not control, right? Let's be very clear on what we believe digital experience management is. But organizations are seeing a lot more value in it than they were before, and it's been around for a long time. So can we just touch on that a little bit? Because I think this has a really good play on how organizations can provide that flexibility with a little bit of visibility.
Yeah, and I'm just going to close off with something on that hybrid work is, businesses have to understand how they want to operate. If I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I have an idea for a presentation I'm working on, I don't want to start my laptop. I want to grab my mobile phone. I want to update my SASE app, my presentation, whatever it might be. So I've got the notes there because I've had the idea at 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to sandbag it until 9 o'clock when I'm sitting at my laptop. So we have to realize that people work in this way and the tools that do that. But we also realize that where it came from the digital employee experience, or DEX, a lot of people came back from this forced at home period and realized that their network at home was probably more stable and reliable than the one they maybe went into in the office. When people started complaining about their experience, Now, what we've found is, and our colleague Yarrow, I'm sure we're going to have a call in the future about this, is a zero-ticket architecture. This concept that if my laptop stops working, surely the IT should already know. When my laptop reboots because it didn't work, why do I even need to raise a ticket? Because surely the laptop, which is managed and owned by my organization, has raised a ticket for me. Well, that doesn't happen today automatically. You need to look at a user's experience. If I was on a call and my audio was particularly poor, was it because of my surrounding or because I'm using the wrong Bluetooth driver? As a user, I don't want to have to think about that. Digital employee experience is not about just, is your application starting within X number of seconds? But while I'm using applications, while I'm using different networks, while I'm connected in different places, what is my experience as an end user and how can I improve and augment that for my end users? So the frustration that comes from a poor quality application or poor quality connection can be mitigated, migrated, removed, or at least made you aware that we know about it and we're going to fix it. So DEX, it's about looking at an experience in the hands of the end user and how we can look at potential impacts on that, but also allow organizations the information to, where possible, carry out preventative measures to protect everyone's experience.
And I think that's where the whole self-healing thing comes in with the DEX platforms. There's loads out there. We're not going to mention any on this episode because this is a thought leadership episode rather than a product overview session. But realistically, this self-healing functionality allows the root cause to be found and then deployed across your estate to make sure it never happens again, keeps people functioning more and more, right? And increasing your user experience score, ideally. I think the other thing for me with getting DEX into an organization, there's a couple of other things, which is allows you to see where you are best investing your pounds or dollars or euros or whatever currency you've got in to get the biggest return for productivity, right? So if you're seeing a massive loss in productivity because of X, Y, and Z, you can put your money as an organization into fixing that challenge across your business, rather than in some cases not knowing that detail may mean you scattergun the payment or the cash into multiple areas thinking that might resolve it. And we've seen that over the years over and over and over again. So that's a really good thing for me, that self-healing and knowing where to put your money, right? And then I think from a user perspective, it also allows this self-service capability. So even if it is a corporately owned business-only device, it allows the user to feel that identity thing we talked about before, is it's my device, I want to look after it and all that kind of stuff. It also means they can self-serve a little bit on that device and get elevated permissions to do things and all that kind of stuff that makes them feel a little bit more in control than what it would be if they didn't have this kind of tooling and capability in place.
I just want to add something as well, because it is really important that when we're developing security tools and components to keep users safe, it's also part of the experience, right? The security, for example, a SASE platform gets developed and it's creating poor connectivity or performance that will affect the user. So we have to apply a lot more thought around the user and the experience when we're trying to deploy new technologies in security. I think that's another fundamental thing that frustrates users, and that they're blocked or stopped or not allowed to do something when actually they should be, maybe, for example.
And yeah, I agree. There's a little story here that I can tell. So many years back, so we're talking over 8 years ago at least, DEX tools were available then, believe it or not, right? They've been around for quite a while, just not as well created as they are today. And I remember working with a trading organization, right, in the finance industry. And we actually used, as part of a investigation with the authorities, to understand whether a trader had been doing illegal trades. Because using the DEX tooling at the time, and we didn't have certain GDPR regulations and various other things in place at that time that stopped us from doing certain monitoring, we could see that user's behavior change and alert on it. So we could see that for the last 2 years of monitoring, that person came in at this time, left at that time, went on this app and did this and all these kind of things. And then all of a sudden, you could start to see they were coming in a bit earlier and they were leaving a bit earlier and they were remoting in from home potentially, and they were doing the things that were different to their normal working style and behaviour.
That's right. Yeah.
And straight away, you could then see that there's something not quite right. And in the new world of DEX, we can do that if we want to, but it's not just for that. We can then get that kind of alert to InfoSec to say something as an anomaly is taking place here, as a thing you might want to go and investigate. And I think when we think about the point of well-being and things we talked about earlier, you can link your DEX tool into well-being tools, right? So that when Kyle is working late in the evening and he's been doing it for 5 or 6, 7, 8 days on the trot because he loves work, as an example, it could do an automated message or ping their manager and say, Kyle's doing a lot at the minute, you might want to check in to make sure everything's okay, or pointing to a nice LinkedIn learning course that tells him how to actually do time management properly, right? So there's the things like that that you can then start to integrate into this to drive better well-being and education into your organisation. And Tim, I think you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say where DEX also leads into, and this is an interesting crossover point. From an employee experience perspective, we've all got mobile phones. If we want an application, we open up the App Store, we go, get me the app. We can operate that way. From what we're seeing in a lot of organizations is app management's out of control because there is 25 different versions of Chrome running on one OS and things like that. When we start looking at DEX, it hooks into how applications are being utilized and how they're being managed. We can narrow that down and we can start using application delivery tools tied into DEX to understand how a business operates. But by tying it into application management with DEX, you also create a better secure environment because people don't have however many hundreds of different versions of Chrome. They start having one version that's patched and updated immediately. Now, I know a lot of people are using tools out there to manage their operating system, but application management moves you into a different level. And you can also start looking at an OS level versus an application level to manage a person's experience. Yeah, and I say, Jake, aside down to Bluetooth drivers, you can say, well, this version of application on that version of the OS, that with that version of Bluetooth driver gives a really sucky experience, so don't do it. Digital employee experience platforms combined with a modern management infrastructure combined with application delivery delivers the most secure environment, the most controlled, and the most understood environment because you have that data to understand how people are working.
And we've got an episode with regards to observability and what does that mean and how do we do that across our platform, security and workspace. So we can touch on that there definitely. So I think just to kind of summarize a couple of things, there's a lot of pros and cons to hybrid work. And I think the key thing here is getting the right architecture in place to allow you to be flexible and agile, to change based on business demand. But the key things here is understanding your business and how you want it to work. From a C-level down, what do you want it to be like for your people? And then think about it from the bottom up. What do they want to see that makes them productive? And try and find a middle ground where possible to drive that employee retention satisfaction, as well as meeting business objectives and InfoSec compliance requirements. So pros for me, really, for hybrid work: flexible, agile, make people feel like they have a say in what's happening rather than having it done to them. The cons being it can get quite complicated because it is hybrid, and as soon as you do something hybrid, it becomes complicated because you've got things everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the world is hybrid in everything we do. So one last comment from me before we wrap it up is that there is a fine balance between security and user experience. And we've got to always bear in mind that the most secure environment is generally not the most user intuitive environment in days of old. And this now can be bridged a little bit better than it used to be with new SASE platforms and architectures that are available, but there still is a trade-off. And when you do that, you have an element of shadow IT that will take place. And again, that's where DEX tools come in to give you a view of what potential shadow IT is taking place in your organization. So in that note, we'll call it the end of this episode, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. I've been Kyle Davies, head of the Office of the CTO.
I'm Tim Russell.
And I'm Steve Faulkner.
Tuning into today's episode. Be sure to check out the back catalogue for more great insights. Don't forget to subscribe via your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. If you have a topic you want us to cover, feel free to reach out. Catch you next time.